Welcome back to the deep dive. So think of the audit process like a marathon, right? Well, today we're hitting that final mile. The really critical part, the overall review phase. It's kind of make or break time. We're sort of putting down the calculator, picking up the magnifying glass, really examining how all these pieces fit together. Things like, can the company keep going? Any last-minute disclosures? It all has to connect before that opinion gets signed. So our mission today is basically to map out how all these responsibilities connect at the very end of the engagement.
Yeah, exactly. This is really where, the auditor earns their keep, so to speak. The material we're looking at today really zeroes in on those final mandatory steps, describing the responsibilities for that overall review, and specifically confirming disclosures around some tricky stuff, like subsequent events and that big one. Going concern. This isn't just ticking boxes. It's the moment the auditor confirms, okay, does the whole financial story hang together? Is it complete? Is it legally sound?
Okay, got it. So let's use this schematic you sent over to unpack it. It looks like a kind of blueprint for signing off,
Yeah.
showing these 6 major areas all kind of converging. Let's try and map that accountability structure right now.
Okay, so if you look right at the center of that schematic, that's the core, the audit completion review. This is mandatory, and it's designed to, well, synthesize everything done during the audit, all the procedures. It's really the last chance before the report date for the auditor to step back and ask that big question. Have we actually gathered enough solid evidence to back up this opinion?
That is a big question because all the field work is done by this point,
Right.
right? So why do we need, 5 more specific checks in this final review? Isn't that just, repeating things? Audit redundancy.
That's a fair question. It might look like redundancy, but it's really about managing risk through a structured final check. These 5 parts are designed to catch different kinds of final risks. You've got the overall review that's looking at the big picture conclusion. Then the final check of the documentation is the audit trail solid, the completion checklists, making sure no regulatory steps were missed, and final analytical procedures.
Okay, hold on a sec. Analytical procedures. Again, didn't we already do those like at the start and all through the field work?
Right, good question. But these final ones, they serve a total different purpose. It's not about finding, new mistakes or errors.
Oh, got
It's
it.
more about looking at the whole picture, the financial statements as a complete story. Do the numbers actually make sense together? Are they consistent and reasonable? If the gross margin suddenly jumps up, but nothing in the industry changed, well, that story doesn't quite fit, does it? That needs a final look.
Got it. So a consistency check, really, a reasonableness check.
Exactly. And then the fifth component, listed right there in the middle, is the going concern assessment.
And putting it there immediately flags how important viability is. The fact that it's part of this final review and it's shown as a huge standalone area,
Right.
well, it shows how critical that risk is considered.
Absolutely. I mean, the whole basis for preparing financial statements usually assumes the company is a going concern. If it looks like it might not be viable, in the foreseeable future, the entire accounting basis could change. So let's maybe pivot to those major responsibilities feeding into this review, starting with written representations.
Right, written representations. Our source material mentions this is practically a whole deep dive topic itself. These are basically key statements from management that the auditor has to get. What's the real point of this document? Is it more than just paperwork?
Well, it looks like paperwork, but it's really about liability and intent. Written representations are formal statements management gives the auditor, often about things the auditor can't directly see or verify, like management's intention maybe to hold certain investments long term, or critically, their confirmation that, yes, they've given the auditor all the relevant financial records. So when an auditor gets these, they're collecting pretty strong evidence that management accepts its responsibilities. It clarifies who's accountable for what.
Okay, so it's almost like a form of confirmation. Proof that the auditor didn't just take management's word for everything. They got specific, formal commitments on record.
Exactly. Now, let's link back to maybe the most fundamental question in this final review. Concern. This gets confirmed right at the end. We're talking about whether the company can realistically meet its debts and obligations as they come due, usually looking ahead about 12 months. The auditor has to check if management's own assessment of this and any needed disclosures about it are appropriate. Getting this wrong, I mean, a misstatement here could be catastrophic, market panic, maybe even bankruptcy filings.
Yeah, that's huge. The auditor is basically giving a nod to the company's assumed future, at least for the next year.
Yeah.
But okay, what about problems found during the audit? Issues management hasn't fixed. That brings us to uncorrected misstatements, right?
Yes, and this is where that overall review shifts into cleanup mode almost. If management hasn't corrected an error the auditor found, the auditor can't just shrug and ignore it. The schematic shows there's a specific required procedure for handling these uncorrected misstatements.
Okay, walk us through that. What exactly does the auditor have to do?
Well, first, they need to clearly identify the essential elements of each misstatement. Categorize them. Is it a factual error, a judgment error, maybe a projected error from sampling?
Yeah.
Then they have to execute the process of evaluating misstatements. And this part gets complicated. You have to assess the impact, not just one by one, but also all together, in aggregate.
And that evaluation,
Yeah.
it's not just about the dollar amount hitting the profit and loss, is it? It's about whether they're material. Like, would they actually influence someone reading the financials, making a decision?
Precisely. Materiality has two sides, quantity and quality. Is it big enough in terms of dollars? That's quantity. But maybe more importantly, is it qualitatively material? Did it, say, turn a small profit into a loss?
Ah, okay.
Or did it affect whether the company met its loan agreements, the debt covenants?
Got it. Qualitative impact.
Yes. And the whole point of this evaluation is to push for a correction. Now, if management refuses to fix a material misstatement, well, that directly impacts the auditor's opinion. That's the bottom line. They'd likely have to issue a qualified opinion or maybe even an adverse one.
Okay, that really clarifies how serious evaluating those misstatements is.
Right.
Now let's tackle the timing challenge. This seems really difficult in the final review. Subsequent events. The clock keeps ticking even after the year-end date on the balance sheet, doesn't it? The auditor's responsibility stretches out.
It really does. And this is probably one of the trickiest bits of the completion phase because that responsibility changes over time. It's temporal. The diagram actually breaks subsequent events into 3 distinct chunks. They cover different time frames, and each time frame requires a slightly different response from the auditor.
Okay, so how does that responsibility shift across those periods?
All right, the first area is about events after the period end. So this is the time between the balance sheet date, say December 31st, and the date management actually authorizes the financial statements for issue. Events found in this window usually fall into 2 buckets. Type 1 provides evidence about conditions that already existed at year-end. Those generally require adjusting the financial statements. Type 2 provides evidence about conditions that arose after year-end. Those usually just need disclosure. And the auditor is actively looking for both types during this final review phase.
Okay, so quick example. If a major customer goes bankrupt 2 weeks after year-end, but the financial problems that caused the bankruptcy were clearly there before year-end, that's an adjustment.
Correct. That sounds like a type 1 event, requires adjustment. But then there's the second time frame. This covers events after the audit period. This is usually a very short window. It's between when management authorizes the statements and the moment the auditor actually signs the report. Now here, the auditor isn't doing as many active searches, but if they do become aware of some major material event in this little window, the statements or maybe the audit report itself still needs to be updated. Sometimes they use dual dating on the report for this. The point is, the auditor still has to react to significant new information right up until they sign.
And the third part listed on the diagram.
The third component is simply executing the specific audit procedures needed to find these subsequent events across both timeframes. So that involves things like reading the minutes from recent board meetings, checking the latest interim financial results if they're available, and importantly, asking management directly, has anything major happened we need to know about? Just making sure any necessary adjustments or disclosures are actually in the financials before that report is dated.
Okay, that explains the layers of complexity there, tracking things across different dates. So finally, let's look at the last connection shown on our schematic. The review process links to something called other information. Why does the auditor need to worry about stuff like, say, the management discussion and analysis, the MD&A? I mean, that part isn't technically audited, is it?
Right. It's not audited in the same way, but it goes back to investor confidence and consistency. Think about it. The audit report is usually part of a bigger package, the annual report. It sits right alongside the MD&A, maybe a chairman's letter, other information that hasn't been audited. But people reading it, they tend to look at the whole document together. So the auditor's specific job here is to read this other information and make sure it's not materially inconsistent with the financial statements they did audit. If the audited financials clearly show a loss, but the chairman's report is all about rapid growth and success with no explanation, that's a potential inconsistency. It could be misleading.
And what if they find an inconsistency like that in the non-audited stuff? What happens then?
Well, the procedures shown involve two steps. First, obviously, executing the necessary procedures, basically reading it and comparing. Second is the final stage of reporting on it. If the auditor finds a material inconsistency, the first step is always to ask management to fix the other information. But if management refuses, then the auditor has to react. They might need to describe the inconsistency in their audit report, maybe in an other matter paragraph. Or, in serious cases, if the inconsistency makes the whole report misleading, they might even have to withdraw from the engagement entirely.
Wow. Okay, this has really given us a clear map of all that interconnected accountability. We started with those core objectives, the overall review, hitting disclosure requirements, subsequent events, going concern, and we've seen how all the components, those 5 checks in the completion review, written reps, misstatements, other info, they all have to link up, and all under some serious time pressure at the end.
Exactly. This schematic, this blueprint we've been discussing, it really highlights that the final sign-off isn't just one action. It's the result of verifying maybe half a dozen specialized, interconnected, and pretty high-risk areas. So for you listening, especially if you're familiar with audit, this shows it's not just a linear checklist. It's really a system of checks and balances where, a failure in one spot, maybe missing a subsequent event, or poor documentation, that could potentially undermine the conclusions drawn from all the other checks.
It definitely makes you think about the huge reliance we place on these final procedures. So here's something for you to chew on. Thinking about how carefully the auditor tracks events after the period ends and evaluates every single uncorrected error. What do you think is the single biggest operational risk an audit firm faces? The one that could lead straight to litigation if just one of these final interconnected checks gets missed or done poorly. Something to ponder reflecting on just how high the stakes are in this final act of the audit.